Welcome to the fourth and final session of the Virtual Tyre Industry Conference in association with the National Tyre Distributors Association. For this session, I'm joined by Peter Taylor OBE, the Secretary General of the UK's Tyre Recovery Association, and by Mark Murfitt, who's Managing Director of Murfitt Industries, the UK's largest tyre recycling operation. The tyre recycling sector is experiencing a number of changes, accelerating due to new legislative agendas, both in the UK and in ELT export destination countries. Over the next hour or so, we'll aim to describe the current market situation faced by tyre collectors and recyclers in the UK, as well as talk about new developments within the sector. So first, I'd like to turn our attention to the context of the market in 2020 and how the events of this year have affected its development. Maybe first we could talk about the previous historic low cost of tyre recovery over the past few years, Peter. The rates businesses paid to ELT collectors have been at historic lows, as you said, in 2018 and 2019. Can you tell us why that was, please?
Oh, well, a short question, but the answer inevitably is slightly longer, but I'll do my best to be concise. First point to make is that the practice of exporting baled whole tyres to India in particular, for what were really ecologically unsound processing, developed very rapidly during this period. I mean, from about 2017, 2018 onwards. And it involved a number of other countries too. We weren't alone in being drawn into this. But the impact on us here in the UK was severe, and there's no other way of saying it. At the same time, because this wasn't the only factor, there were multiple factors happening at that time. At the same time, eastbound container rates were also at historic lows, and that gave a further impetus to this trade. Then at the Indian end in particular, and we are talking largely about India because of its sheer size and its ability to absorb a lot of this stuff. At the Indian end in particular, tyres became the cheap fuel of choice. And this was assisted, driven by weak environmental enforcement by authorities in India. It was actually very, very poor indeed, and there was virtually no enforcement at all. Here in the UK as well, there were certain factors against us, in particular the multiple flouting of exemption rules, which became all too easy to ignore, and a lot of people came in under exemptions and then exceeded those exemptions and were most involved in baling and exporting, so they drove that trade too. So we faced what was really the perfect storm as this unrestrained export of our old tyres. Well, what did it do? It hollowed out our domestic reprocessing capacity, and it caused gate prices to collapse to historic lows. That was the scenario we found ourselves trying to wrestle with.
Mark, can you describe the impacts of these low rates on businesses such as yours?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I'd agree with what Peter says. I think the issue from a UK processor's point of view, and particularly companies such as ourselves that clearly invest heavily in infrastructure to create products and to manufacture products and to build markets was very severe. We are in a global of our end material, so much of our material goes into artificial soccer pitches, various other sports, baseball, American football, and we export those products to over 50 countries around the world. Lots in the Far East, Australia, the Middle East, South America, and obviously Europe. We compete, therefore, on a global basis, and part of the economics of our business is the gate fee. The gate fee covers part of the cost in essentially processing those tyres, and whilst we add value clearly through the process, the gate fee nonetheless does play a part in the overall economics. So when we're competing against European or Australian manufacturers of a similar product, a rubber granulate, the gate fee can skew the economics of that. So that's been very difficult for us. We've relied really on producing a very high quality, and also in developing new materials and new products, so coating the rubber, polyurethanes, etc., looking to provide better playing experience, and better heat properties and lower toxicological properties as well from it. So that's the way we've had to go. We've just had to keep sort of reinventing ourselves and being creative with the product.
Yeah. Sorry, Mark, carry on.
No, please carry on.
I was just going to ask if the ability to export so cheaply, or the sort of tendency to go to exporting ELTs impacted you as well from the point of view of raw materials.
Yeah, it did. We have two parts of our business essentially. One is where we process the material for sports applications or industrial use, which I've explained, things like carpet underlay, etc. The other is our supply of tire-derived fuel to cement kilns. That is where we noticed by far and away the biggest effect. It is, we are competing against fossil fuels effectively. That is where the short supply really was, and we did struggle to meet demand from the kilns. The repercussions of were severe, and I think we do and we will continue to feel the repercussions of that for a very long time, in that cement kilns, clearly large multinational businesses, they are predominantly there to produce cement. It's a very competitive industry. Alternative fuels play, again, a significant part in the economics of the business. And what the kilns have done is the kilns have moved away from tyres to look at other sources of fuel, and so have moved to things like SRF, solid recovered fuels, refuse derived fuel. And they are, when large multinationals are having to make significant investments, multi-million pound investments to change the fuels that they burn, they're not then things they turn away from quickly. So they've kind of started that juggernaut rolling,
right,
and have moved into those other fuels because they have a need. They, environmental point of view and a CSR point of view, they are committed to upping the percentage of non-fossil fuels that they burn. So they have these environmental agendas which they need to keep. And if tyres, as they had been, were being exported to India, well then they are forced, because they've made pledges in terms of the percentage of alternative fuels that they're going to burn. They have to find them somewhere, and that, I think, was by far and away the biggest effect of what was happening, as Peter said, particularly in India. that's the economic side, and that's what we feel here.
Yeah.
Over and above that is the huge cost to both the environment and human, life effectively, because of the practices which were taking place in India. And again, that can't be underestimated. There were lots of reports. Reuters did a particularly good one, in a piece of investigative journalism where they were looking at, the effect of what was happening. So yeah, on many levels, it's not been good.
Absolutely, and it's part of the public consciousness now in a number of different areas. Certainly, it's got a lot of media attention recently. I thought maybe we could move on from that as the context as to what has been happening over the past sort of 8 to 12 months from the point of view of legislation, both here and in the target markets for our ELT exports, and why this is changing things from the point of view of the gate fee rates now. Peter, could you maybe talk to us a bit about that?
Well, I can certainly open that discussion, Andrew. Thank you. I think the first thing to say is that enforcement initiatives are just as important as legislation itself, and in the TRA we've argued that for a very long time, not always to a very warm reception, I have to say. But as a nation, and perhaps we're not alone in this, we quick, but we tend to reach for regulation, but be very, very slow when it comes to enforcement. And one without the other is pointless. And I hope we're learning that lesson. Now, back to your central point, what has been happening since the beginning of this year. First thing to say is that, again, outside of the UK and particularly India, the authorities have started to take steps to curtail the irresponsible burning of end-of-life tires, as well as reducing and in many cases eliminating permits for their import. So that is very positive. I think we feel that is likely to continue. Certainly hope it does. I hope there won't be any displacement with other countries sort of trying to pick up the baton. We're very watchful of that. Here in Britain itself, the EA and SEPA up in Scotland and others, they've upped their game. I think we have to say that, because they've done so significantly. They've been slow to move, but they see the need now. So enforcement activities have increased very noticeably in recent times, and there was a TRA press release very recently on that. And I guess the second point will be that it's now clear that the current exemptions regime will end very soon. And it will end in England and Wales, as indeed it has already ended in Scotland. This means that those operators who are currently working under exemptions will have to apply for either a bespoke permit or fall back on even more onerous, what are known as standard rules. So in a sense, it's put up or shut up time, to put it crudely. And what effect will this have? This will have the effect of leveling up what has been a very uneven, unlevel, not very grammatical term, but an unlevel playing field. It's been a long time coming, but very welcome nevertheless.
Absolutely. So that will consequently, obviously, continue to have an impact on the gate fees that people are paying.
Oh yes, yes, certainly it will, and it should stabilise those gate fees. Yeah.
Mark, how does this action affect you at Murfitts? Can you talk about how the stabilisation of the gate fee and at a higher rate will affect you, or is affecting you already?
Yeah, I think there's perhaps just to go back a stage. We are quite rightly heavily regulated. The way that we build our factories, we police what we do, the environmental measures that we have to put in place. All of that comes at a cost, a worthwhile cost. And linking that back as a consumer, when you buy a tire, you pay an environmental fee for the disposal of that tire. I think it's quite right to expect as the consumer that in paying that fee, you also expect the environmental best practice. That is the link back to it, and I think that's what we provide, but it comes at a cost. I think that cost is still very reasonable. The stabilization of gate fees, it allows us to keep investing. It allows us to invest in new processes, new machinery, the R&D. We have a really significant R&D program that one specific one that we've been running for 5 years. That needs investment, and the outcome of that investment is that we create sustainable markets for our waste tires. We've also seen that through the stabilisation of the gate fees, we were able to encourage, particularly the large users of ELTs, the cement kilns, and obviously ourselves through our crumbing operation, to re-engage again. That we're able to say, look, we've got some certainty. We can see what's happening in the marketplace. The regulator is on board. The TRA, are being very active, and obviously the NTDA support that. So it's when you're talking to large multinationals, what they want certainty. They want to know that the supply chain, is robust, and they can set up their business and their supply chains accordingly. That's the benefit, that it gives people some certainty, certainly into the near future.
I mean, Mark is dead right on that, if I can just interject. In a healthy investment climate is everything. If we don't have that, if there's no investment, there will be no market development. And government doesn't always seem to get that.
And I think also the point with that is that it is a very short supply chain. So from the tire coming off at the retailer through to processing, it is a really short supply chain. And what you need in that supply chain is you need that material to keep moving. There are countless issues with tires building up at centres, space, health and safety, local authority issues. So you need an outlet. It's a strain. It is unlike any other manufacturing business that I've been involved in that normally with the manufacturing business, you have a bill of materials. What your raw material, how much what you're going to make, what you're going to sell, and you order your raw materials in to meet that demand and that programming. This is very different. Effectively, your raw materials, which they are pushed to us. So it's a very different dynamic, but the chain between coming off and processing is actually very short. Unfortunately, as all of the NTDA members will know all too well, tires take a lot of space. And so that needs to be slick and it needs to be effective. I think where we were heading was, potentially catastrophe within the industry, because you have to keep that moving. There is a time when people fill up, and we see that people operating illegally, they fill up and walk away from the site. There's only so much of that can be done. Ultimately, what's important for the retailer is that material is taken away. They don't make money storing tyres in their centre. They make money having space to be able to change people's tyres or the other services which they offer. I think a robust, well-organised network is good for them too.
Absolutely. And speaking of catastrophe, I think the next thing we have to discuss is the impact of coronavirus and the countermeasures the country's taken against it. I'm sure this will have had some sort of impact. So I wondered if, Mark, you could start us off by talking about how the first lockdown periods affected Murfitts, and maybe a little bit about how the lockdown period where we are starting as these videos go out, how that might affect you, and what measures you've had to put in place as a business.
Obviously the first one, sort of first week of April, we really noticed clearly from the 23rd of March. But again, I think there's an important point about that, which leads on from the last bit of the conversation. The country didn't stop. Essential workers, still were out there. Lots of businesses still had to carry on. Particularly in the supply chain. We still wanted to go and have a look at those empty shelves, but they did need replenishing. So, certainly we noticed that on particularly the commercial side, with the commercial tyres that we take, there was a dip, but nowhere near the same dip as there was on the passenger car side. So again, we are a service industry. We couldn't actually stop, because where do those tyres go? They still need processing. So we kept working, obviously taking our tyres in, which is our commitment to our customers. Interestingly, during and certainly shortly after, so sort of first week of June, what we did notice was an increased demand from new people coming on, potentially new customers saying that they were kind of left full, and weren't getting collection. So I think again that's the importance of that robustness in the supply chain. Between, I guess, first week of April, June, probably sort of 55%, something in that region really, and then came back very quickly, which actually surprised us. We thought that the build back to pre-COVID, I won't say normality, because I don't know what the new normality is, but was actually probably quicker than we anticipated, which was encouraging. So yeah, we kind of just took up that strain. Obviously our factories kept working. We were under some pressure with the construction industry, particularly some of the cement kilns closed. There was obviously a lot of uncertainty as to who was allowed to work and who wasn't. I think depending on what happens tomorrow, I guess. But and that's not the Trump election. One of the advantages I hope that we're going to see now is more clarity, and the fact that they will, try and keep the majority of the economy going. So that's good, because obviously you need the outlets for the material from our very narrow perspective.
Absolutely.
And certainly from the sports industry's point of view, we're very close with the FA, FIFA, Sport England, and they've been very good, very positive. We were worried early on the economic impact would stretch to sport and sports funding. But we've been assured by, say, people like the FA, which have a huge investment program in sports facilities, obviously particularly centred around football, but also Sport England and the Football Foundation through schools and colleges, the funding that they're putting in there, that money is ring fenced. They have a massive investment program over the next 3 to 5 years. So that was really good news that whilst obviously things are very challenging and difficult, they are still investing. So
yes, it's obviously very reassuring that that people are thinking a bit further ahead than maybe what's going to happen in the next 3 months.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
Peter, could you maybe broaden that out to the experiences of the wider Tyre Recovery Association's membership?
I'll try to, and I would like to say that again, I agree with Mark that there has been too much short-termism in our business, and perhaps now we're turning a little bit of a corner there. We need to think much more constructively, much more long-term. But getting back to your question of a moment ago, how well did we in the industry cope? And I'll just speak for TRA really. And I think without sort of over-gilding the lily, I think we did quite well after what I think was some early indigestion, if I can put it that way, which was caused perhaps less by COVID itself than by the sudden increased demands put on our domestic capacity to cope with this sudden decline in the export of bales to South Asia. But overall, certainly the TRA met its commitment to its customers. True, there were some people who weren't our customers who suddenly came and knocked at our door and didn't always get the answer they wanted, but tough.
I think actually, Peter, sorry to interrupt, but I think actually, and this sounds a very strange thing to say, but I think we would have reached I don't want to sound too dramatic, but perhaps a sort of catastrophic tipping point earlier had we have not seen the slowdown, because the timing was such that the illegal export market was tailing off rapidly, actually, at the same time that we then went into lockdown.
That gave us breathing space, didn't it?
Absolutely, Peter. I know it's a very strange thing. It's an odd thing to say, but I think that is sort of factually correct. I think it's moved it along, and there is still incredible strain. But sorry, Peter.
No, sorry. Just exactly my words, and it showed. It demonstrated, I think, that we do have resilience in the system, and we should be proud of that.
It certainly focused minds, by the sounds of things, on the need for that resilience as well, it seems. So we'll move on to a bit more about the current situation, which we've touched upon there. And Peter, the TRA was warning that the effects of the pandemic could result in a new rash of tyre dumping and site abandonment in the autumn. Can you give us an update on that situation, and have tyre dumping problems increased in your experience?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'll try. I mean, I sometimes feel we spend too much time crying woe, but look, if we don't, who will? And it's important that the authorities listen. And to be fair to them, they have started to. On this issue of dumping, I don't think it's just going to cease, not in the short term anyway, because there are a number of poorly compliant operators out there who for a while will continue to take in tyres, or have taken in tyres at prices that are quite insufficient to cover the true cost of their responsible recycling. So what are they going to do? Well, the likely consequence is that many of these tires will ultimately be abandoned, or worse still, spontaneously catch fire, which tends to mysteriously happen from time to time. So we are going to see situations like that. We've warned the Environment Agency. They're aware of this. And one of the purposes in warning them is that I'm determined that the TRA doesn't, and indeed the recovery business in this country doesn't get blamed for this situation, because again, it comes down to enforcement. Now, there is also a criminal element out there. I mean, there are always two sorts of people in the margins of business. There's the ignorant, the incompetent, and then there's the rogue element. And there is a criminal element in all of this, who will seek to exploit higher gate prices, and they'll do it for personal gain because they see a bigger opportunity. Obviously, when gate prices were lower, the opportunity was less. Now the gate prices are higher, so look, magic, the opportunities are greater. In other words, tire crime has the potential to become that much more profitable, and we have to be alert to that. Retailers in particular have to be alert to that, because we should be reminding them of their legal duty of care. And the authorities need to be fully aware of it as well. This is not something that certainly we in the TRA can have much influence over. We can only warn of the dangers. We've got to be on our guard. So
what are the most effective ways that businesses can actually guard against this, to help reduce the problem? You talked about awareness and maybe some lobbying there. Are there any other kind of avenues that people can get in?
I mean, the first thing I would say, if that's one for me rather than for Mark, but look, abandoned tires don't just fall from the sky.
I was going to say, come to us.
They come off wheels, and they mostly originate either from retail premises or end-of-life vehicle dismantlers. I mean, where else do they come from? And we're lucky in a sense but it's not rocket science pinpointing where the dangers are. And this is a perennial problem, and we really have to learn to deal with it. And it's a scourge on the environment as well as on the public purse. And it's, again, it comes back to reminding all those who remove tires from wheels, vehicle dismantlers, retailers, and indeed anyone else, local authority dumps, that there is a legal duty of care in all of this. And it doesn't just apply to people who collect or purport to process tires. It applies to everyone in the recovery chain, starting with the consumer, and then the retailer or the vehicle dismantler. We've completely lost sight of that. So a few salutary prosecutions would probably not. And for almost, look, again, I would say that for almost 2 decades now, TRA has operated its responsible recycler scheme. We've offered an assured market-based approach to best practice, and whereby all our members are regularly audited for compliance. There's plenty of choice out there. Lots of people are in the TRA. It's not a monopoly. Pick who you want to work with, but there is no excuse for passing tires to questionable operators, collectors, and so on. So again, to summarize that, very, very many retailers across the UK have long been signed up to the responsible recycler scheme, but there does remain a small but nevertheless significant minority who frankly don't seem to care. We still have some cleaning up to do in our own backyard, and that's an industry challenge. TRA alone, you know, can't do it. We all need to join hands and work on this one. The answer is within our control.
Mark,
I hope Mark agrees with that.
can you? Yeah, I'm sure you agree with the broader points. But could you maybe describe about how the problem of this rogue element might affect Murfitts, and is it a reputational problem that the sector has to combat as a whole, or in your opinion, and how does Murfitts? What's your attitude at Murfitts to it?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that Peter said, and particularly, and particularly would stress the point which Peter made, actually, that there is a legal obligation. You know, it is poorly policed. But there is nevertheless a legal obligation, you know, for anyone who creates a waste product to ensure that that's dealt with in the appropriate way. So that is there. We just people don't perhaps spend enough time thinking about it, and enforcement is very poor. It doesn't do the industry any good. You know, picking up a newspaper and seeing what's happened. It does tar the industry with you know, the same brush, if you like, and particularly at a time when you know we are looking for solutions. Lots of talk about circular economy. We want to be a professional industry. You know, we and other people developing processes for the industry will look to funding. You know, large, extremely large capital projects to introduce new technology. So it's important that you have credibility. Now, you know, whilst one can do that on their own and you know, through their own business, there is nevertheless the wider point that you know, if all people read about is tyres being dumped, you know, tyre fires in warehouses, abandoned warehouses, etc., 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 it just you know taints the reputation of all involved, which isn't good, and isn't good in terms of attracting the type of investors that you want to develop the industry. So I think that's you know that's perhaps the not so much easily seen. It's only seen perhaps by people like us that are looking to develop in the business. But you know it is part of the industry and the industry's development.
We've talked a bit about the end user already. Do you think the awareness factor would be increased if recycling fees or gate fees were sold more effectively to end users? That's probably a question for Peter primarily, but Mark, please chip in as well.
Well, I would have said if the opportunity arose in this conversation that I think retailers could make a lot more of this. You know, there is a story. The industry has a very strong story if it wants to use it. The other thing I would perhaps comment, and not sure it fits in really in the context of this particular question, but look, new tire manufacturers invest an awful lot of money in their brands and their brand image. So why would you then be happy to see those brand names strewn around the countryside when those tires are fly tipped or abandoned? And I would urge new tire manufacturers to be a little more circumspect to what they like to call their routes to market. In other words, the people handling their tires for sale. And you know, there's surely an implied interest in making sure that people who are selling your product are disposing of your old product responsibly. Not always sure that's the case.
Mark, would you agree? Is there anything you'd like to add to that point?
No, I think that's a really good point. Actually, about 18 months ago, perhaps 2 years, we actually did some research that we had a marketing company do for us, looking at exactly that, people's, the consumer's perception and what was important to them. And indeed, our research indicated that actually a fair proportion of people they are interested. They do want to know that when they pay that fee for the disposal of the tyre, that it's being disposed of in an environmentally safe way. So there is interest, undoubtedly interest, not all the public, but a fair proportion. And we see that in a much wider context, don't we? That, people are worried about Starbucks coffee cups or whatever it is.
Yeah.
There is a far greater awareness that will continue to grow. And we also see that through legislation. If you look at, and clearly I know our situation in terms of the UK, but if you look at broader European legislation and the way in which that's going, and the same here in terms of putting the current issues to one side, politicians are listening and commenting on the environment much more than they ever were. And clearly they're doing that for a reason. It's because there is the debate out there, and people are taking note. The Attenborough effect, whatever you want to call it, it's real. And so yes, I think we can engage with the public, and I would absolutely encourage retailers to do that.
Absolutely. So we've talked about both ends there of the tyre supply chain, the end user and the manufacturer. To bring it back to tyre recyclers and recovery in general, I wanted to ask about the availability of exemption permits at certain sites, because it's a perennial talking point, but it's bound to come into sharper focus as the predictions of non-compliance at these sites appears to be a rising issue. Peter, could you tell us a bit about why these exemption permits are available, and whether enough is done to ensure that they remain legally compliant?
Well, sadly, it's been a running sore over many years, and we've said repeatedly that non-compliance at some of these sites in particular is a real issue. And the EA has recently been doing some enforcement work, and again, I think you've probably seen our recent press release on that. But even in the first part of this year, almost 50% of sites visited were non-compliant in one way or another, and that is just not acceptable. Now, we have exemptions because exemptions were it was a regime that the EA and DEFRA felt responded to what was policy at the time, a sort of light touch regulation and so on. But I'm not sure that, light touch also meant light enforcement. So it was, it was obvious what would happen. It's just too tempting to exploit that situation. I think I calculated at one time that if you were an exempt operator, your chances of getting an enforcement visit were sort of once in 100 years. Well, fortunately, that's changed a lot in the last 12, 24 months, I'm pleased to say. Scotland commendably and rightly outlawed exemptions 3-4 years ago now. And we're real pleased about that, and it showed it could be done. England and Wales has dragged its feet somewhat because legislatively it was slightly more difficult, but miraculously we've now found a way through that. So, you know, where there's a will, there's always a way, and there wasn't a will, quite frankly. On enforcement, well, happily DEFRA and EA have woken up to the need, and they've been doing a lot of work on that recently, and I think they themselves have been pretty disturbed at the result, and that has really driven this current agenda, which involves eliminating exemptions for almost all purposes, and we welcome that, and it's kind of come to an end. It's running a bit late because of COVID and pressure on parliamentary time and so on. Should have, you know, that process should have happened as we speak now. It didn't, but it is going to happen as we move into next year. So we can foresee a point in time later next year when exemptions will cease to be a factor.
Mark, can you talk about your attitude to this direction of travel and where the damage it's caused in the past, maybe?
Yeah, I suppose I'd probably start by saying it's highly unlikely that anyone's just going to wake up in the morning and decide to want to be a waste tire processor, and that being the case, you know, why should you need to go online and get an exemption? So there is planning, there is infrastructure to do, you know, to offer a sound best practice process. It's not something that you should be, you know, as say, worrying about going online and getting an exemption. It takes time and planning and investment and all those things. So that kind of points back to something Peter said very early on in our conversation, that it's opportunistic. So it's, you know, someone sees, well, you know, I can collect those tires, I can do whatever with them. It was, you know, export them legally or store them, and I'll kind of make myself half legal. I'll go online and get an exemption, and then I can do what I like. So I think it's been disastrous, because it stops, you know, it has stopped investment in our business. It has stopped, you know, the UK's infrastructure growing. You know, it's curtailed investment, it's curtailed R&D, all of those things, which can only be seen as bad. You know, we should operate in a regulated market, and that's it. I sympathise with the EA. You know, they are to some extent as good as the funding they receive. You know, officers are under extreme pressure in terms of, you know, boots on the ground have been seriously cut back over the years. And that was a policy decision that was made. Peter referred to the light touch. I don't think it's worked. I would always much rather that you know, the regulator needs to talk to industry. You know, they need to engage with the TRA. They need to engage with the larger processors and operators, because, you know, we know what's happening. So I think it would always be good to have it, and we do through the TRA and other organisations have that link with the government and the various regulatory bodies, and that should continue to be the case. You know, but if you intend to change something, let's discuss it. At least you have another perspective.
Well, I think the concept was just naive. And if you couple that with the sort of easy access to becoming a waste collector of any sort, really, a waste collector permit is about as easy to obtain as setting yourself up as an estate agent. You pay 125 quid and hey, you're in. And it's loose. And so personally, I think there's an argument for having waste-specific carrier licenses. That way, you can introduce stronger elements of best practice, and that's where the industry can help, because we're there. We do that already, but we just don't have the legislative underpinning for it.
That's exactly it, isn't it? I mean, the fact of the government's agenda when it comes to enforcement, the fact of investment available and resources available to government agencies is that it's going to be very difficult for them to beef up their operations without significant support from industry. So there's clearly, while there's a temptation to engage collectors offering unrealistic charges, businesses in Tyre retail clearly need to take a step up, don't they? As well as it's not just a matter of expecting enforcement to suddenly change.
Well, you see that, we see that. The government has been remarkably reluctant, really, to share this responsibility for enforcement with the industry. It pays lip service to best practice schemes and the like. It should be making much more use of them. It's a really valuable tool. And instead of claiming that they're bemoaning the fact that they lack resources, we have the resources too, and together I think we can be very successful. But they've got to join with us.
I do think though that, you know, the light, it's kind of cause and effect, isn't it? You know, the light touch was, you know, as anyone would be faced in whatever we do, an association, a business, you know, of any type, whether you know that's journalism or what we do. You know, if the budget is X, and that's what it is, and that's been reduced significantly, something has to give. And I do think that's what they were faced with, you know, severe budget cuts. You know, and we could argue that we haven't got enough time to argue the rights and wrongs of that. But what it does mean is we need to find a new way. And I think that's where Peter's point comes in, that you know, that is perhaps more shared responsibility between industry and government agency. So yeah, hopefully that's what we see.
There's certainly capacity there for greater efficiency in that relationship, isn't there? That seems to be where we're coming to.
Yeah, and as Peter said, we know what we're doing. Why not put more burden onto industry? I get that entirely, and have no issue with that. But you know, you need the legislative framework, which only comes from the government. But it's, you know, being prepared to engage and drive that forward, and it doesn't happen clearly overnight. But yeah, I think we're going in the right direction.
So we've talked a bit about investment in the sector, especially at Murfitts, for example, and the wider scene appears to be that there are investments coming into the UK at the moment in the tyre recovery sector. We've seen a lot about the promise of new pyrolysis technologies coming into the market, for example. Do you think that these new technologies can help support this recovery sector, and what are your comments in general about these investments coming in?
Yeah, I think undoubtedly, much earlier on again in the conversation, I said, you know, we've done a lot of R&D, particularly over the last 5 years. One of our priorities in that R&D, one of our lead project really was exactly that, the development of a pyrolysis process, which we now have up and running. Potentially, it's a massive game changer in terms of adding value and finding a sustainable route for all of our end-of-life tyres. I don't think anyone is quite there yet. It needs to be adopted by the end users of the material, and I think, you know, it has the potential to be a little bit Wild West. You know, people making ridiculous claims in terms of, you know, what the materials can do and what the markets are. So I think people need to be cautious and circumspect. I know from our own point of view, the huge amount of work we've done with end users, with scientists, chemists, you know, looking at the material and the processing of the material. I think we're close. It is about, again, developing the markets. It's the same thing, you know, we did 18 years ago when we came in. You know, when I came into this business, it was about building confidence in the materials, and I think we need to go through that process again. People that use, for example, carbon black, which is one of the outputs from pyrolysis, you know, you are using that material in, you know, highly technical and sophisticated products. You know, clearly the ultimate goal is back into tyres, and certainly again legislation is moving that way. Huge emphasis on circular economy and you know, manufacturers of products being responsible for the life cycle of those products. So most certainly legislation will continue to push in that direction, which is good. And some of this, I gave a briefing to the EU commissioners just before lockdown, actually, specifically about tyres, even though the UK's moving on clearly. But you know, our legislation will still follow. We're still, you know, we're still tied up in that, in terms of certainly our end customers are global businesses. And there is, I think, a huge push in terms of trying to advance the reuse of materials. Really encouraging the other week, some news came out that you know, they're looking at various types of subsidy scheme based on you know, the carbon footprint, etc., just to encourage, just to push it over the line, and enable recycled materials to compete with virgin materials. So that was really interesting, and I think policy will keep shifting in that way. But going back to the material and the end users, we have to be able to demonstrate to the end users of the material that, you know, the material is safe, it's consistent, and it can be delivered to the specifications they want. At the moment, there are no set standards. There's lots of work being done on the ATSM standards for carbon black and recycled carbon black, but we're not there. It's you know, an industry in its infancy, and you know, I think we have a few more years of building confidence and understanding the process. But yeah, potentially, I think it's very exciting and great to be involved in it.
Peter,
I think we've got to carry government with us, and for all of this to happen, we need a supportive regulatory infrastructure. And you know, too often we get halfway down the road on something, and then, you know, all sorts of rocks are thrown in our way. Arguments about end of waste status, when does something cease to become a waste, and so on. And these are, you know, to some of us who are trying to, or to our members who are trying to actually move forward, these arguments are just arcane. They're the arguments of the job's worth, not of officials who are genuinely interested in developing recycling infrastructures in this country, and we have such an opportunity to do just that.
Mm. So, would you say that this in mind, there's an element of cautious optimism coming out of these new technologies and new investments? I think that's
no, absolutely. I think it's it's an exciting prospect. I think as is always the case, industry will move faster, and research and development will move faster than the regulatory position. And actually, we've seen that, haven't we, with COVID? Actually, the regulators kind of playing catch up in terms of clinical trials, etc., and bending legislation to make that happen. And in a much lesser way, that's where we are. It's then about engaging and saying, look, this is the way, and it reinforces again the point Peter was making earlier. It just reinforces, I think, the need for us to have a really good dialogue and say, look, this is what we're doing, this is the way we're pushing, these are the issues we see from a regulatory standpoint. If you are making hoses for the automotive industry or anything, or tires or whatever, it is unlikely you want to be buying waste. You want to be buying a product that is classified as a product, and we went through exactly the same thing, I guess, back in, Peter, we're probably 2008ish with PAS. Which for us at the time was a massive issue. We produced 1,000 tons of rubber granulate to be used in soccer fields, that strictly speaking was a waste still. And if you're going to name any Premiership club and saying, would you like this in your training ground, and we're using an artificial carpet with rubber infill, but by the way, you need to get a waste permit. It's an obvious answer. Something off. That was an issue at the time. Now the agency took a fairly relaxed position on it, because clearly they can see what we're doing. But you don't want to rely on a relaxed position from a regulator. You want to already have the regulatory position established. So absolutely. I think, it's very important that we have this dialogue.
Far too often we spend an inordinate amount of time challenging some of this silliness and some of these barriers to development, to market development. And we've got to get past this sort of thing. We just need to be more sensible about the way we approach things. We're trying to develop products or develop markets. We need to move forward in a sensible and supportive manner with the authorities. Not always the case.
And on that note of conciliation with the authorities, I think I've reached the end of this conversation. I'd like to thank you both for your time on this. It's been a really illuminating look at Tyre recovery and where we are and how we got here. And I very much appreciate both of your time and expertise. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.